the grave that refused to stay shut. The Vengeful returned the first shovel of dirt. The rain fell like cold needles in the midnight woods. Elias lay at the bottom of a shallow, jagged hole, his chest barely rising. Above him stood the two people he loved most in the world: Clara, his wife of 10 years, and Marcus, his business partner and best friend. Marcus held the bloody crowbar, Clara held the flashlight, her hand perfectly steady. Elias tried to speak, to beg, but his jaw was shattered. He could only stare at Clara's beautiful, cold face. There was no pity in her eyes, only the calculation of a woman who had just inherited $1 million life insurance policy. "Get it over with," Clara whispered, her voice devoid of emotion. Marcus plunged the shovel into the wet earth and tossed the first mound of dirt onto Elias's face. The soil tasted like iron and worms. As more dirt rained down, the darkness consumed him. Elias didn't die immediately. He suffocated slowly, choking on mud and the absolute, soul-crushing agony of their betrayal. His heart stopped, but his rage did not. An hour later, Marcus patted the mound of dirt flat with the back of his shovel. They turned to leave, believing their dark secret was buried forever. But as their taillights faded into the distance, the flat earth atop the grave suddenly cracked, pushing upward as if drawing a deep, terrible breath. The celebration. The fire crackled warmly in the living room of Elias's sprawling mansion. Clara sat on the expensive leather sofa, swirling a glass of expensive red wine. Marcus sat beside her, his arm draped casually over her shoulder. They had spent the morning rehearsing their lies for the police. Elias had gone on a sudden business trip and never returned. It was flawless. "To us," Marcus said, clinking his glass against hers. "And to the future." Clara smiled, a genuine, relieved smile. She felt lighter. The suffocating weight of her boring marriage to a man she no longer loved was finally gone. They had his money, his house, and each other. Nothing could touch them now. But as Clara took a sip of her wine, a strange metallic smell filled the room. It was the scent of wet soil and old copper. She frowned, wrinkling her nose. "Do you smell that?" she asked, setting her glass down. Marcus sniffed the air, his smile fading. Before he could answer, a loud, wet thud echoed from the front porch. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She stood up, walking slowly to the heavy oak door. She peeked through the peephole, but it was pitch black outside. Slowly, her trembling hand turned the deadbolt and pulled the door open. There was no one there. But resting perfectly in the center of the welcome mat was Elias's silver wedding band, completely caked in fresh, wet mud, the awakening. Deep in the heart of the Blackwood forest, the rain continued to pour, washing away the dead leaves and pine needles that Marcus had carefully scattered over the grave. The earth was soft, muddy, and restless. Beneath the surface, something impossible was happening. The rage that had boiled in Elias's final moments had tethered his soul to his broken body. The cold soil could not extinguish the burning fire of his hatred. His mind was a fractured loop of Clara's cold eyes and Marcus's swinging crowbar. He didn't want heaven. He didn't want hell. He only wanted them. His fingers, stiff and purple, twitched in the darkness. The dirt around his hands loosened. With a sickening crack, his dislocated shoulder snapped back into place. It was an agonizing, unnatural rebirth. He began to dig. Upwards. His fingernails tore, his skin scraped against sharp rocks, but he felt no physical pain, only an overwhelming, dark hunger for justice. After an hour of frantic clawing, his hand breached the surface, grasping a wet tree root. He pulled his ruined body from the earth, gasping for air he no longer needed. He stood naked, covered in mud and his own dried blood, under the pale moonlight. He looked down at the empty hole. The grave had refused him. Elias tilted his head back, letting the rain wash the dirt from his dead eyes, and then he took his first heavy step toward the city. He blinked, rubbing his eyes. He refreshed the page. The balance was 0. "What the hell?" Marcus muttered, a cold dread pooling in his stomach. He clicked on the transaction history. The entire sum had been transferred out just 20 minutes ago. He immediately called the private banker. "Listen to me. Someone just drained my offshore account. Freeze it immediately." The banker's voice was remarkably calm. "I'm sorry, sir, but the transfer was authorized in person." "In person? By who?" Marcus yelled, standing up from his desk. "By the primary account holder, sir," the banker replied. "Mr. Elias stood right here in my office not half an hour ago. He said he was closing the account." Marcus dropped the phone. It shattered on the marble floor. The interrogation. Detective Thorne sat across from Clara in her pristine living room. He was a veteran cop, a man who had seen enough lies to smell them a mile away. Clara sat rigidly, holding a teacup with shaking hands. She wore black, playing the part of the worried wife. "Mrs. Clara," Thorne said, his voice a low rumble, "we found a site in the Blackwood forest this morning. It looks like a shallow grave. More concerning, we found blood there that matches your husband's medical records." Clara forced a gasp, covering her mouth. "Oh my God! Is Elias?" "That's the strange part," Thorne said, leaning forward. "There was no body. But whoever was in that hole dug their way out." Clara's teacup rattled against the saucer. She couldn't stop it. Dug out." "Yes, ma'am. We also found tire tracks near the site. We're analyzing them now." Thorne stood up, adjusting his coat. He looked around the extravagant room. "You and your husband had a large life insurance policy, I understand?" "What are you implying?" Clara snapped, her fear turning to defensive anger. "Just gathering facts," Thorne said, walking toward the door. He stopped and turned back. "Oh, by the way, I noticed your husband's favorite armchair is wet. You might want to get that cleaned." Clara turned pale. She looked at Elias's leather chair in the corner of the room. Pressed perfectly into the expensive leather was the dark, damp imprint of a man sitting down. The shadow in the hallway. Night fell, casting long, menacing shadows across the mansion. Clara was alone. Marcus had promised to come over but wasn't answering his phone. She had locked every door, armed the security system, and closed every blind. She sat on the edge of her bed, clutching a large kitchen knife. The house was entirely silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs. Then, the power went out. The house plunged into total darkness. The hum of the refrigerator died. Clara gasped, her grip tightening on the knife handle. She fumbled for her phone, turning on its weak flashlight. The narrow beam trembled as she swept it across her bedroom. Nothing. She slowly crept out of her room and peered down the long, dark hallway. The silence was absolute. Squish. It was a soft sound, like a wet sponge being stepped on. It came from the bottom of the stairs. Squish. Drag. Clara stopped breathing. The sound was moving upward. Someone was climbing the stairs. Squish. Drag. She pointed her phone's flashlight down the hallway toward the staircase. For a terrifying second, the light caught the edge of a figure standing at the top step. It was tall, hunched, and dripping black mud onto the pristine white carpet. Before Clara could scream, a voice rasped from the darkness, a voice that sounded like grinding stones and crushed earth. "Hello, darling. Marcus returns to the woods." Marcus couldn't take it anymore. The missing money, the dead silence from Clara, his own mounting paranoia. He had to know. He had to see the grave with his own eyes to prove that Elias was dead and the police were just playing mind games. He drove his SUV to the edge of the Blackwood forest, grabbing a heavy maglite from the glove compartment. The woods were pitch black and unnaturally quiet. No crickets, no wind. Just the sound of his own heavy breathing. He found the spot easily. He pushed through the ferns and stopped dead in his tracks. The grave was wide open. The earth was violently displaced, just as Clara had said the detective told her. Marcus fell to his knees at the edge of the hole, shining his light into the dark pit. It was empty, save for the indentation of a human body at the bottom. "No. No, no, no," Marcus whimpered, tears of sheer terror pricking his eyes. He had hit Elias with the crowbar himself. He had checked his pulse. He was dead. Suddenly, a cold, dirt-caked hand shot out from the darkness behind him and grabbed Marcus by the ankle. With a violent, inhuman yank, Marcus was pulled forward, tumbling headfirst into the cold, muddy pit. Before he could orient himself, a shovel of wet dirt hit him squarely in the face. The locked car. Marcus thrashed in the pit, coughing and spitting out mud. Blind panic took over. He scrambled against the slippery walls of the grave, his expensive suit tearing, his fingernails breaking against rocks. Above him, the figure stood in silence, holding the shovel. "Elias! Elias, please!" Marcus shrieked, clawing his way over the edge. The figure didn't swing the shovel. It just watched. Marcus scrambled out of the hole and ran blindly through the woods, branches whipping his face, thorns tearing his skin. He didn't look back. He ran until his lungs burned and he burst out of the tree line, slamming into the side of his SUV. He fumbled with his keys, dropping them in the wet grass. He snatched them up, unlocked the door, and threw himself into the driver's seat. He slammed the door, hit the locks, and jammed the key into the ignition. He turned it. The engine clicked, but wouldn't turn over. Come on, he screamed, trying again. Dead. Suddenly, the motion sensor security light on his car flickered on. Marcus looked up. Standing right in front of the hood, staring through the windshield, was Elias. His face was a bruised, broken mask, his eyes glowing with a hateful, dead light. Slowly, Elias raised a muddy hand and slammed it flat against the driver's side window, shattering the glass into a million pieces. The deadline. Clara had locked herself in her walk-in closet. She sat huddled on the floor amongst her expensive shoes, the kitchen knife held tightly to her chest. The house was still completely dark. The dragging footsteps outside her bedroom door had stopped 10 minutes ago, but the silence was worse. It meant he was waiting. She frantically dialed Marcus's number. It rang 3 times before connecting. Marcus. Oh God, Marcus, he's here. Elias is here. The power is out and he's in the house. Please, you have to come. Clara sobbed, tears ruining her makeup. There was no answer on the other end. Just a crackling sound of static. Marcus. Are you there? Say something, she pleaded. Through the phone speaker, she heard a sound that made her blood freeze. It was the sound of wet, labored breathing. Then, a slow, agonizing scraping sound, like a shovel being dragged across an asphalt road. Marcus can't come to the phone right now, the voice crackled through the receiver. It was Elias. But he wasn't speaking into Marcus's phone. Clara slowly lowered her phone. The raspy voice hadn't just come from the speaker. It had come from the dark corner of the closet, right behind her silk dresses. The trap. Clara didn't think, she just ran. She burst out of the closet, flew down the pitch-black staircase, and sprinted out the front door into the cold night. She threw herself into her sports car, not caring about the blood or mud she tracked inside. She peeled out of the driveway, her hands shaking violently on the steering wheel. She drove blindly toward the only place she felt safe, Elias's old downtown office building. It had security, bright lights, and locks. She used her emergency keycard to enter the underground parking garage. The harsh fluorescent lights hummed above. She ran to the private elevator, swiping her card. The doors opened, and she rode it up to the 12th floor. The office was empty and silent. She ran to Elias's old corner office and locked the heavy glass door behind her. She collapsed into a chair, gasping for air. She was safe. She had to call the police. She had to confess everything, just to get protection. As she reached for the desk phone, the power in the building suddenly cut out. The emergency red backup lights flickered on, casting a bloody glow over the office. Then, the deadbolt on the office door slowly clicked. It had locked from the outside. She was trapped. From the shadows of the corner, Elias stepped out into the red light. The spade. Clara backed away until she hit the floor-to-ceiling window behind her. There was nowhere left to go. 12 stories down, the city streets looked empty. Elias stood before her. Up close, the horror of his return was magnificent. His skin was pale and decaying, a deep gash on the side of his head where the crowbar had struck him. He smelled of rot, worms, and unforgiving earth. "Elias, please," Clara whimpered, sliding down the glass to her knees. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It was Marcus's idea. He manipulated me." Elias didn't speak. He stepped forward slowly, his ruined boots leaving thick clumps of dirt on the Persian rug. He didn't reach for her throat. He didn't raise a hand to strike her. Instead, he reached behind his back and pulled out a small, rusty gardening spade. The very same spade Clara had used to plant roses in their backyard, the spade she had brought to the woods to help hide his body. He tossed it at her feet. It clattered sharply against the hardwood floor. "Dig!" Elias commanded, his voice vibrating with unnatural bass. Clara stared at the spade, confused and terrified. "Dig? Dig what?" "We are on the 12th floor." Elias pointed a rotting finger at the solid oak floorboards beneath her. "Dig your grave, Clara. Because I am not leaving until you are under the earth. Confession in the dirt." "You're crazy. I can't dig through wood and concrete." Clara screamed, hysterics finally taking over. She kicked the spade away. Elias tilted his head, his dead eyes narrowing. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted. The solid hardwood floor beneath Clara's knees began to soften. The oak planks warped, darkened, and turned to wet, foul-smelling mud right before her eyes. Clara gasped, pulling her hands back as the floor of the 12th-story office literally transformed into a patch of graveyard dirt. The magic of a dead man's vengeance defied logic. "Dig," Elias repeated, taking a step closer. The air grew so cold Clara could see her breath. Trembling, broken, and realizing there was no escape from this supernatural nightmare, Clara picked up the small spade. She struck the dirt. It yielded easily. She began to cry, throwing handfuls of soil aside. "I hated you," she sobbed as she dug. "You were always working. You never looked at me. I wanted to be free." Elias watched her impassively. "Freedom has a cost," he whispered. Suddenly, a muffled groan echoed from beneath the dirt Clara was digging. She froze, her spade hovering in the air. The groan came again, desperate and muffled. Someone was buried directly beneath her in the enchanted dirt. The motel room. 10 miles away, Marcus had abandoned his broken car and hitched a ride to a cheap, roadside motel on the outskirts of town. He paid in cash, terrified that using his card would alert Elias, or whatever Elias had become, to his location. He locked the flimsy door of room 104, threw the deadbolt, and jammed a wooden chair under the handle. He was covered in mud, scratches, and sweat. He needed to wash the graveyard off his skin. He went into the dingy bathroom, turned the shower on as hot as it would go, and stripped off his ruined clothes. He scrubbed his skin until it was red and raw, trying to wash away the smell of the earth, the memory of Elias's hand grabbing his ankle. He stepped out of the shower, wrapping a thin towel around his waist. The bathroom was thick with steam. He wiped his hand across the foggy mirror to look at his exhausted face. As the fog cleared, Marcus didn't see his own reflection. He saw Elias standing directly behind him in the mirror, holding the bloody crowbar. Marcus spun around, screaming, throwing his hands up to defend himself. But the bathroom was empty. He looked back at the mirror. Written in the condensation, directly over his reflection's face, was the word, "traitor." Then, the lights in the motel room blew out. The dead end. Marcus scrambled out of the bathroom in the dark, throwing on his muddy pants and leaving his shirt. He kicked the chair away from the door, unlocked it, and burst out into the motel parking lot. The rain had started again, pouring in heavy, miserable sheets. He ran down the walkway, looking frantically over his shoulder. The neon no vacancy sign flickered, casting a sickly red glow over the wet asphalt. He saw a figure standing at the end of the corridor. It was Elias, silhouetted against the rain, dragging the heavy crowbar along the concrete walkway. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Marcus bolted the opposite way, sprinting toward the rear of the motel where the trash dumpsters were kept. He rounded the corner, slipping on a puddle, and crashed hard into a chain-link fence. It was 10 feet high, topped with barbed wire. A dead end. He scrambled to climb it, his fingers slipping on the wet metal. He got halfway up when a cold vice-like grip clamped onto his ankle. Marcus screamed as he was violently ripped off the fence, crashing hard onto his back. He looked up, coughing up rainwater. Elias stood over him, raising the heavy iron crowbar high into the air. "Please, brother," Marcus begged, weeping openly. "I'm sorry. You buried your brother," Elias said. And he brought the crowbar down. Dragged back. Marcus awoke to the agonizing pain in his skull and the jarring sensation of motion. He was being dragged. By his feet. He opened his swollen eyes. He was no longer at the motel. He was back in the Blackwood forest. The rain beat down on his bare, bloody chest. Elias was walking effortlessly, dragging Marcus over rocks, roots, and thorns, heading deeper into the woods. "Stop! Please stop!" Marcus groaned, coughing up blood. The crowbar strike hadn't killed him, it had only incapacitated him. Elias wanted him awake for this. They broke through the tree line into the clearing. There it was. The open grave. The pile of displaced dirt sat wet and menacing next to the dark hole. Elias dropped Marcus's legs. Marcus tried to crawl away, but his body was broken. He dragged himself an inch through the mud before Elias placed a heavy, dirt-caked boot squarely on his back, pinning him to the earth. "You loved my money," Elias rasped, looking down at the pathetic, broken man who used to be his best friend. "You loved my wife. Now you will love my grave." Elias reached down, grabbed Marcus by the hair, and dragged him to the very edge of the pit. He left him dangling half over the black void, staring down into the darkness. Suddenly, a car engine roared through the woods. Headlights cut through the trees. The impossible choice. A heavy SUV crashed through the brush, sliding to a halt near the grave. It was Clara. She stumbled out of the driver's side, covered in mud, clutching the small spade. Elias had somehow teleported her here, forcing her to drive to the site of her ultimate sin. She looked at Marcus, broken and bleeding at the edge of the pit, and then at Elias, the unstoppable force of vengeance standing over him. "Elias, stop! You have us both. What do you want?" Clara screamed, falling to her knees in the mud. Elias turned his slow, terrifying gaze toward his wife. He pointed to the open grave. "The earth demands a body," Elias said, his voice echoing through the trees like thunder. "It will not close until a traitor is planted inside." He looked between the two of them. "One of you goes in. The other walks away. You decide." Silence fell over the clearing, save for the rain. Marcus looked up at Clara, his eyes pleading. "Clara! Clara, help me. We can fight him together." Clara looked at Marcus, then at the black pit, and finally at Elias. The survival instinct in her cold heart took over. Her eyes hardened. She gripped the spade tightly. "I'm sorry, Marcus," Clara whispered. She stood up and walked toward him. "It was your idea anyway."
The small spade clattering beside her in the darkness. Marcus lay gasping at the edge, staring down at her. He had survived. He looked up at Elias, expecting the monster to kill him anyway. But Elias just stood there, holding out the large shovel Marcus had used the night before. "The earth is hungry, Marcus," Elias whispered. "Feed it. The burial." Marcus stared at the shovel in Elias's hand. He understood the twisted, poetic justice of the moment. He had to bury his lover alive to save his own life. Trembling, sobbing uncontrollably, Marcus took the heavy shovel from the dead man's hands. He walked to the pile of wet dirt. "Marcus, no. Don't do this." Clara screamed from the bottom of the pit. She tried to climb the slippery, muddy walls, but she kept sliding back down, her manicured nails tearing in the soil. "Elias, I'm your wife. Have mercy." Elias did not answer. He simply watched. Marcus plunged the shovel into the dirt. He closed his eyes and threw the first mound of wet earth into the pit. It hit Clara squarely in the face. "Stop. Please," she shrieked, spitting mud. Marcus couldn't stop. He was driven by pure, primal terror. He shoveled faster, his tears mixing with the rain. The dirt rained down on Clara, covering her legs, her torso, burying her screams. She fought wildly, clawing at the falling soil, but it was too heavy, too wet. Within minutes, her screams were muffled. Then they stopped entirely. Marcus flattened the top of the grave with the back of the shovel, just as he had done for Elias. He fell to his knees, utterly broken, an empty shell of a man. The peace. The deed was done. Marcus knelt in the mud, staring at the fresh, flat patch of earth. His mind was fractured, broken beyond repair by the horrors he had committed and witnessed. He waited for Elias to strike him down, to finish the job. But when Marcus finally found the courage to look up, he was completely alone. Elias was gone. The heavy, oppressive air of the forest had lifted. The rain stopped, and the thick clouds parted, allowing the pale moonlight to illuminate the clearing. Elias had sought justice, and he had found it. The betrayers had turned on each other, paying the ultimate price in the very dirt they had used to hide their sins. Marcus was alive, but he would never truly live again. He would spend the rest of his days in a mental asylum, raving about dead men and hungry earth, entirely consumed by the madness of his guilt. In the Blackwood Forest, the grave remained flat. It did not churn. It did not open. The earth had claimed its rightful payment. The next morning, tiny green shoots of grass began to sprout over the freshly turned soil, hiding the dark, vengeful secrets of the dead forever.